Whenever there's a new political party and control of a country's government, there's going to be a noticeable shift in policies that goes with it. After all, having an agenda which was different to the previous government is often why there's a new leadership. That sentiment also extends to elected heads of state, such as the US president. And of course, this year we've witnessed one of the most stark changes in residents of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue when President Trump was replaced by President Biden. Some examples, backed by plenty of video evidence, showed President Trump to be a vocal climate change skeptic who regularly mocked wind turbines, renewable energy, energy saving, and electric vehicles. He saw tightening emissions restrictions set in motion by his predecessor, President Obama, as antithetical to strong business growth. He pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Accord, and when he did celebrate electric vehicles at the White House, it was because of the jobs that Lordstown Motors claimed it would bring to Ohio, though that is a theme that we will see later on in this video. President Biden, meanwhile, was elected on a platform that included a heavy push to reduce America's carbon footprint, reducing America's reliance on foreign energy and fossil fuels, and focusing heavy industry on a program to, use his campaign slogan, Build Back Better. He pledged to increase spending on renewable energy projects, to rebuild the US transportation infrastructure, and to include more public transit, new bridges and roads, as well as revitalize the rail network. And he pledged to expand electric vehicle charging stations, increase electric vehicle incentives, and retrain tens of thousands of workers across the nation to make that all happen. So far, some of President Biden's goals have hit metaphorical brick walls. A plan for a bipartisan spending package to fund all of the above has hit major roadblocks. And while there is currently a package going through the legislature, it's a shadow of what President Biden had originally promised. Although that is before you discuss the controversial idea of taking some of the things dropped from the original infrastructure package and passing them through a budget reconciliation measure. And no, I'm not going to discuss the merits or drawbacks to any of the above. But what I am going to discuss today is the executive order that's just been signed by President Biden, an order that will set a new target for transitioning the US private vehicle fleet to zero-emission capable vehicles, will impose new emissions targets for the auto industry, and hopefully make electric vehicles a more comfortable proposition for the average American. So today, let's look at what the executive order sets out to achieve, detail the automakers that are responding to the executive order in a positive way, and look at the controversy that seems to be popping up in relation as to why Tesla was conspicuously absent from the event and press announcement, something that seems to be becoming a disturbing trend from the current administration. But before I do, I want to acknowledge that this is, by its very definition, going to be a political video. We've gone through the whole process of discussing why politics matter before on the channel, right here, so I'm not going into it on this video. As with anything that involves politics, emotions are going to be high, and there are going to be strong opinions on both sides. The purpose of this video is not to make excuses for or take sides either way, but rather present the facts in as much detail as we can, as well as give you some of our own thoughts, both positive and negative, about what's been announced today. Joined by representatives from each of the big Detroit three, that's Jim Farley, CEO of Ford Motor Company, Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors, and Mark Stewart, COO of Stellantis, a move that we think here is quite overtly political in order to garner support from the United Auto Workers Union, President Biden announced a new target to make one half of all new vehicles sold by 2030 zero emission. He also reiterated the administration's commitment to turning its entire vehicle fleet to zero-emission vehicles. So far, so good. But in the presidential briefing accompanying that announcement, the White House confirmed that this goal includes not only battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, but also plug-in hybrids in its mass definition of zero-emission vehicles. While the announcement's a step in the right direction and is certainly better than anything we've seen to date from the US government, those of us here at the channel seriously doubt that the announcement target will be drastic enough and quick enough to have enough of an impact on reducing the effects of anthropogenic climate change. The White House says that its new target will be accomplished by tighter emission standards and fuel economy targets, which, we should note, will inevitably push automakers towards making more electric vehicles. That's something we've already seen in Europe under the Euro 5, Euro 6 and upcoming Euro 7 emission standards. Its first goal is to remove the rollbacks and easier targets put in place by the Trump administration, followed by an acceleration of existing fuel economy targets to bring them into effect earlier than originally planned. The Biden administration says it's building on the momentum from the California Framework Agreement. That was when 5 automakers, Ford, which includes Ford brands like Lincoln, Honda, which obviously includes Acura, Volkswagen AG, which includes all of Volkswagen's brands, BMW, including Mini and Rolls-Royce, and Volvo, which of course includes Polestar, worked with the state of California to implement voluntary emissions and fuel economy targets within the state. Interestingly, though, only Ford was present at today's announcement, but as I said, we'll come to that in a moment. As part of today's event, the trio of automakers that accompanied the president announced that they were also committing to the same target, to make between 40 and 50% of annual US volumes of vehicles battery electric, fuel cell electric, and plug-in hybrid by 2030. The announcement obviously also comes against the backdrop of previously announced policies and measures undertaken by the White House to help the auto industry lower the cost of electric car battery packs by 80% by the end of the decade, to increase the domestic content of all electric vehicles, to source as much of the raw materials used in electric car battery packs domestically as possible, although it's also working to source a huge amount of raw materials from overseas, seemingly to appease environmentalists, and to train or retrain a new workforce to work in the new electric car industry. This is in addition to the proposed spending packages that set up increased incentive programs to help people get behind the wheel of an EV, as well as build out a robust nationwide charging network for electric vehicles. Something amusingly the White House said would be the first nationwide charging network for EVs to use. But those of us in the industry know that it will be far from the first, as the first was definitely Tesla's supercharger network. That workforce, says President Biden, will, he hopes, be employed in well-paying union jobs. Again, we will come to that in a moment. But now we know the basics of the announcement, what do we think of it? First, let's talk to those targets. As a Volkswagen AG board member recently noted, tighter emissions targets are tough to meet with traditional internal combustion engine technology. Thus, it's more cost-effective and more practical to skip trying to meet those targets with ICE and instead to go straight to plug-in. But because of how corporate average fuel economy standards work, that's CAFE for short, there is still a huge latitude for automakers to bypass and circumvent regulations. CAFE standards work by taking all of the light-duty vehicles made and sold by a particular automaker. That's all of its cars, SUVs, and sub-half-ton pickup trucks, which is all often just shortened to cars, but does include all of the vehicle types I've just mentioned, and then averaging out the fuel economy figures for all of those vehicles. As long as the average fuel economy and emissions of all of the vehicles sold by an automaker are below the targets, everything is good. If the automaker is above the target, it usually is fined a set amount for however much it is above the target in terms of emissions or below the target in terms of fuel economy. This means as long as an automaker can produce a certain number of zero or low emission vehicles, it can just continue to produce internal combustion engine vehicles as long as it is legal to do so. And this goal that the current White House to have 50% of all light-duty vehicles sold by 2030 being zero emission gives automakers plenty of permissions to continue to produce suck, squeeze, bang, blow, especially if plug-in hybrids are considered zero tailpipe emission vehicles for the benefit of this executive order, which they blatantly are not. What CAFE standards don't take into consideration either is how far a vehicle will be driven in its lifetime, which means that as long as the automaker sells enough zero-emission or near-zero-emission vehicles, it can continue to sell gas-guzzling SUVs and pickups, and once those vehicles have left the dealer lot, they can be driven as much or as little as their owner requires. And that really doesn't actually do a whole lot for emissions further down the road, because once a vehicle has been produced and sold, it can continue to be on the road for 10, 20, or even 30 years. Rather than banning the sale of all new internal combustion engine vehicles, which many European countries are committing to, this 50% target leaves the door wide open for the continuation of fossil fuel car sales. Right now, about 17 million cars, remember that includes SUVs and light-duty pickups, are sold every single year in the US. If we assume that figure grows to, say, 20 million cars every year by the end of the decade, a number which I think is still a little low to be honest, we're talking about 10 million EVs sold per year, but also 10 million ICE vehicles. As a target, that is woefully inadequate. There's no way to sugarcoat it. It's certainly better than what we have now, but it's not enough. But there might be a way to get more out of these targets. I'd be remiss not to note that many US states like California, Oregon, and Washington, as well as the rest of the 12 ZEV states that follow California, are working on their own tougher targets for zero-emission vehicle sales. California, for example, is seeking to ban all ICE car sales by 2035, which is equivalent to around 2 million vehicles every year at current rates. There are 12 ZEV states, and they represent over 90 million Americans, a significant proportion of the total US population of about 330 million people. If those states, altogether, push for a 100% zero-emission or near 100% zero-emission target, then the rest of the US will have far less of a target to worry about hitting. We've talked as a team, and we feel that the targets announced today should have been stricter, and they should have focused more on affordability and equitability rather than that just 50% target announced. While we're at it, we also think making sure that people get well-paying jobs is an essential part of the transition to cleaner fuels and ensuring a sustainable economy, because that helps create growth. It ensures more people can make that transition to a cleaner, greener future by buying their own low-emission vehicle. But today's event was also a little one-sided. In focusing on the Detroit Three, companies that do, yes, produce the lion's share of all new cars sold in the US today, the administration also unforgivably ignored the impact of the current largest electric automaker in the US, Tesla. Right now, Tesla produces approximately 1 million cars per year. The majority of those vehicles are sold in North America, though Tesla is expanding its overseas sales and production every single month. Last quarter, Tesla made more than $1 billion in profit, and it employs a high number of US citizens. However, the event today focused at least as much on blue-collar workers and union jobs as much as it did on EVs. Sure, the president reiterated the performance specifications of the Ford F-150 Lightning, a vehicle that he got to drive himself. He joked about being given the first chance to drive in General Motors' first electric Corvette, which might have been a tacit hint that GM is readying one for market. And he regaled the same kind of anecdotal tales about his time with various union representatives and auto worker unions over the years. The president said that things were, quote, beginning to happen, and called on America to lead rather than be left behind. But he said jobs needed to be brought back to the US and that automakers in the US needed to reclaim the lead they had lost from the past. Tesla, as I'm sure you're aware, is famously a non-union production facility. In fact, Tesla has been in the past taken to court by former employees for allegedly penalizing staff who have tried to join or form a union at its facilities. A car company that does not support the current administration's goals of having auto industry workers in well-paying union jobs just didn't fit into today's narrative, and frankly, that's a major omission. Tesla should have been mentioned because it has played such an essential part in getting the auto industry to where it is today. Sure, many of us here at the channel would rather that Tesla workers had more collective bargaining rights, as that's one way to make sure that companies and employers do not take advantage of their workforce. But ignoring its influence completely is also disingenuous, and it's totally not helpful. It also makes the White House an instant target for those who tend to see Tesla as the be-all and end-all of electric vehicles, especially in the US. There are also some questions as to why other automakers weren't included today, with some news outlets suggesting other automakers were less happy to agree to those same targets as Ford, GM and Stellantis. Sadly, we've not been able to confirm this, but what we have confirmed, thanks to Tesla CEO Elon Musk, is that Tesla definitely wasn't invited today. Personally, the team here feel that Tesla's lack of presence to the event was a move to appease the unions and thus appeal to the workers that the president says will be at the heart of a, quote, blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America. These are the very same blue-collar workers across the country that, and I cannot emphasize this enough, the president desperately needs in order to continue to ensure that he or a fellow Democrat can remain in the White House. They are the blue-collar workers who may have previously voted for President Trump, but played an integral role in President Biden's election win last year. They are, to all intents and purposes, the political kingmakers of the US election cycle, alongside those who work in other essential industries across the nation, including the farming world. Furthermore, these 50% targets announced today could be seen as a significant enough thing by those who want an all-electric future, although we'd all dispute that, yet not strict enough to scare those who are still wary of plug-in vehicles, those who would feel that their liberties were being attacked should a stricter rule have been proposed. And look, that's a terribly cynical verdict, but without a single mention of Tesla, well, it's hard to see it any other way, especially when many of the cars at the event today were production intent vehicles that are confirmed for production, but not yet available to buy. There was one Chevrolet Bolt EUV in the background, but that was the only currently in production car in attendance, presumably because the White House only wanted domestically produced, union-made cars there, and as I'm sure you all know, the Ford Mustang Mach-E is famously made in Mexico. So, what do we have here? Well, we should celebrate the fact that more money is being invested in electric vehicles, that there's an executive order that is the most progressive and aggressive in setting forth a way to reduce the emissions of the American vehicle fleet, and by proxy get more people into EVs. However, this is significantly compromised by the need to appease politically to the various factions that exist in the political landscape today. We've already seen the US infrastructure bill gutted from what it was originally proposed to be, and we've every expectation that electric vehicle spending will be further reduced as that bill makes its way through the various stages of its journey to the chambers on Capitol Hill. What's left at the end may not be what we need it to be, and in fact, already isn't. It's good and appropriate to celebrate progress, which is certainly what today was in part about. But that's simply not enough, and ignoring the many key players in the auto industry is simply not okay, just to ensure that the president gets continued support from a demographic that has been key to his political fortunes throughout his career. Tesla, though, will be fine for not being included. Frankly, if I were Elon Musk, I'd be preparing my own statement showcasing how much expansion my various facilities will enjoy between now and that 2030 target date. We know that Tesla already has a capacity of 1 million cars globally, and I believe it could easily achieve 5 or more times that by the end of this decade if Giga Berlin, Giga Texas, and all the other rumoured facilities, including those in Europe and Asia, are online by that point. But other automakers are also left out of the event. Volkswagen, which aims to produce the lion's share of its entirely electric vehicle offerings for the US domestically, was nowhere to be seen. But again, while Volkswagen's facilities in Europe are heavily unionised, Chattanooga, where the ID.4 is going to be built, is currently not. And I think that kind of proves my point. Don't you? That's it for today. If you like the video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and our other 2 channels, Transport Evolved Take 2 and Transport Evolved Shorts. We know that while a fair few of you are already subscribed, many more aren't. So go on, hit the bell and help us out. Don't forget also to give Super Thanks a try, hit the button and let us know what you thought. If you just want to leave a comment, you can also do that below. And if you're not someone who likes the YouTube comment section, I know I don't, then why not continue this on our Discord server? It's free, and we will of course leave the link below. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month Patreon supporters. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons. They are Andrew Martin, Guido Drahoa, Brophy Wolf, Anonymous Freak, Regine Fellows, Carl Hodson, Gordon C, Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Shawnee Wader, and Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters, John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylin, and Ian. If you'd like to join the ranks of our wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin and Ko-fi. And of course, you can also buy your very own TE swag like this at our Redbubble store. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving!